Here's what they don't teach at art school. When nations go to war, design is in the front line. Skills that in peacetime are devoted to making the world a better place are used in wartime to devise better ways for people to kill each other. It's what you might call a guilty secret.
One thing that wartime does to the design process is to accelerate it. It accelerates the industrial process and the process of creating, shaping machines, objects.
The Second World War was a global clash of politics and ideology. And at the heart of this struggle lay, as ever, a brutal design contest.
Our instinct as regimental soldiers at that time was, we're not going to stand much of a chance against this sort of thing.
This gun cost £2 7 shillings to make.
The Russians make well over 60,000 T-34 tanks.
They recommended office work, but I said, no, I want to be a welder. That's an important job, and that's what I want to do. I had no idea what it was.
In this total war, excellence would be pitted against ingenuity, innovation against industrial muscle. At stake was not just the fate of the world, but the shape of the world to come.
So this chair is sort of the payoff for all the work that they did during the war. People always look at this chair and say, God, it looks uncomfortable. And I always say, you know, we'll have a seat. And then when you sit in it, it's just great.
This is a program about death by design. From bows and arrows to guided missiles, the history of warfare is about humans devising better ways to kill each other.
Most of the popular interest in war, of course, particularly in the Second World War, is about battles, about heroes, about dramas. What we lose sight of is the fact that those men in the field, those weapons they're wielding, those planes that they're flying are only possible because back home somebody has thought very long and hard about how to design those weapons.
In the lead-up to the Second World War, no one thought as deeply about the strategic power of design as the Nazis. From the moment of their takeover in 1933, they retooled Germany into a military machine designed to deliver the 1,000-year Reich.
You can't explain the success of the Nazi regime in conquering most of Europe in a very short time unless you understand that use of design in some very sophisticated ways.
The Nazis inherited an industrial base that already boasted of the superiority of its products through design. Supremacy ripe for appropriation by the self-proclaimed master race. But Germany hadn't always enjoyed such a reputation for excellence.
The critiques internationally said always German goods were very cheap and very tasteless. And so the weapon could be seen as an early lobby group to change this reputation in Germany that everything which comes from Germany is just bad.
Founded in 1907, the Deutsche Werkbund was committed to overturning this embarrassing reputation. Leading by example, its members set out to redefine the meaning of made in Germany.
This is a water kettle designed by Peter Behrens for the company REG in Germany. And this water kettle was produced in a series with a possible over 80 variants. There are 3 different uses of metal, 3 different shapes, 3 different sizes, and 3 different ways of how the surface is formed.
Peter Behrens' work for electrical company AEG was a landmark project. He created a new AEG typeface, branding for its products, and even designed its factories. A corporate identity overhaul, the first of its kind. This was just one of a series of collaborations between designers and industry, promoted by the Workbund, that championed this integrated total design for the modern age.
In the Werkbund, there was the idea, if you want to put forward the industrial production of goods, you also have to think about how it looks like and what signature it could have.
In just a few decades, Germany's cheap and nasty reputation was systematically overturned.
An industrial standards unit was set up, which meant that industry would be standardized, the size of steps, the size of paper, the size of filing cabinets. By 1933, what was in place was a very secure sense that standardization in design, a functional approach to the kind of rational organization of industry, became integral to public and private life, even if the German citizen wasn't aware of it.
But there was one piece of industrial design from the early 1930s that no German citizen would miss. It was made here, in Wolfsburg.
Non esiste, e qui così sgombriamo.
There is no other product. Let's be clear about this. There is no other product that is as complex but as simple to use as a car.
In 1936, the prototype for a new car was completed. Designed by renowned race car engineer Ferdinand Porsche, it would become the most successful car in the world.
This is one of the first prototypes of a true Beetle. Form follows function, nothing more. It was a very, very simple car, very basic. In that time, we looked for this streamlined design to give the passengers enough space inside the car, to find enough space for the engine at the rear, and to give them enough space also for their heads. I'm very long, but I have any problem to sit in that car.
Beneath the Beetle's simple but striking design lay a masterclass in the German pursuit of excellence.
The design of a Beetle is a timeless one. And this point, quality, everywhere quality. People trusted in the quality of that cars. And that's why this car and this company was so successful.
In fact, the Beetle would redefine the meaning of success. By 1955, 1 million had rolled off the production line. 25 years later, that figure had topped 20 million, making it the most successful car in the world. But there's a darker side to the Beetle story. As the Deutsche Werkbund had recognized, design is about communication. And in pre-war Germany, this cute-looking car conveyed a carefully calculated political message on behalf of its client.
Hitler used the Volkswagen most specifically around the celebration of his birthday, and he also ran an election campaign suggesting that he'd given the nation the Volkswagen, therefore they should give him their vote.
Hitler's interest in the Volkswagen was just one example of the Nazi Party's sophisticated understanding of the symbolic potential of design to communicate ideas and ideology. An appreciation directly appropriated from Germany's recent industrial past.
There was a sophisticated awareness of the power of the symbol in the sense that had been developed in commercial contexts. Going back to the Werkbund, Peter Behrens had thought very deeply about how you instill an identity in a mundane object like a lamp or a fan. So what happens is that interest in identity goes up several notches and is applied to a nation state.
Imagery, aesthetics, branding, call it whatever you like. The whole thing can be seen as an early, extremely powerful and very sinister essay in what's now known as corporate identity.
They wanted to give a sense of power. You know, they wanted to look not just military effective, but they wanted to overawe their enemies.
It took just 9 months for the German war machine to blitzkrieg its way to the coast of France. Pushed out at Dunkirk and facing imminent invasion, the British were forced to rethink their approach to design.
By June 1940, Britain had been soundly kicked out of Europe. We were in desperate need of submachine guns. And on the 12th of December 1940, a man called Harold John Turpin sat at his kitchen table and designed this, the Mark I Sten gun.
Germany had smashed through Europe with weapons that spoke of quality design and cutting-edge technology. But with high-grade materials and skilled workers in short supply, the British had no choice but to take the low road.
This is Harold John Turpin's first prototype, serial number 1. The main tube was virtually exhaust pipe tube. The screws are BA sizes, available in any hardware shop in the country. The mainspring was made by Flexlow, bed spring makers. Nothing on this gun was forged or machined with expensive machine tools. It was all punched and fabricated.
This was ingenious improvisation, but it wasn't simple enough.
Because it used wood and was full length, Mr. Turpin was told to simplify it, and he did. He came up with this, the Mark II Sten gun.
Easy to assemble and use. The Mark II was a flat-pack submachine gun.
This gun cost £2 7 shillings to make. It is cheap and it is nasty, but it does exactly what it was made to do.
Issued to troops at home and parachuted into Nazi-occupied Europe by the thousand. The Sten became the signature weapon of Allied resistance. And it signified a radical departure from the traditions of British design.
Push it down and back.
The Sten gun emerged in Britain immediately after the withdrawal of the British troops from France after Dunkirk. And in a way, it was a great shock for Britain to have to learn to design instantly, rapidly, just like that, and to get away from a comfortable, old Victorian, Georgian, craft-skilled world into one of brutal mass production. But the British learned, for a need for survival by instinct partly, to tighten up the design process, to get rid of some of that beautiful craft. When you get to a Sten gun, this is now design, manufacturing that can be just produced like that. I mean, you can produce them as fast as you can fire them almost. And so that intense simplicity made it could be manufactured by anyone from Polish underground resistance workers to the smartest old factory in Britain.
A factory, for example, like this one, in Merton, South London, whose pre-war output was a world away from military hardware.
He made pedal motor cars, dolls, soft toys, bicycles and tricycles, fairy cycles, aeroplanes and rockets and all these things. It was most certainly the largest toy factory in Great Britain. It was almost certainly the largest toy factory in the world.
Lines Brothers, makers of Triang toys, began manufacturing Sten gun parts in 1941. Founder and toy designer Walter Lines immediately saw ways to improve it.
One of the things that my father noticed was the Sten gun, and he looked at it and he said, oh no, that's not the right way to make that. So he redesigned it completely, without having previously designed a gun in his life, of course, and he took it to the Ministry of Defence and got an order, in fact, for $500,000 on the spot.
Thanks to the toy maker's refinement and the skills of the Triang workforce, the number of parts was reduced from 69 to 48. And production costs for the Mark III fell still further. A welcome case of more bangs for your buck. But the make, do and mend approach came at a price. Many soldiers hated their Stens. They had a tendency to misfire if dropped, jam at critical moments, and their aim was reputedly less than true. With its back to the wall, perfectionism was a luxury Britain just couldn't afford. But that didn't mean that every piece of wartime design was compromised. While the toy makers of Merton churned out the unloved Sten, furniture makers in the home counties were occupied with a thing of real beauty.
There was a whole workforce of carpenters, woodworkers who weren't really being utilised in the same way that all the metal workers were.
There was a scarcity of materials, a scarcity of expertise, huge pressure to deliver something which answered specifications which had never been achieved before by mankind. That's why design is the opposite of art. When you're engaged in design which is involving industrial production, you are given constraints and there's always a clock ticking. But I think that those constraints energize the design process.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Incredible. What a machine, eh?
Wow.
Edward Barber and J. Oscoby run one of Britain's leading contemporary design companies. Today, they've come to see a groundbreaking piece of aviation history. One which rewrote the rule book.
The fastest aircraft from 1941 to 45, faster than your Spitfire and Hurricane.
The Mosquito was known famously as the Wooden Wonder, a very high-speed, twin-engined aircraft that would be unarmed. It would be an unarmed light bomber. And the reason it was unarmed was to keep weight down, but it would fly so fast and so high that it could whiz off to Berlin, bomb the Germans, and whiz back without being intercepted by German fighters.
If you tap that, you feel it's all wood.
It was the first truly dynamic, ultra-high-speed, modern warplane made of wood.
The finest piece of furniture this country's ever built.
Flying furniture.
The Mosquito was the brainchild of the de Havilland Aircraft Company. Made almost entirely from plywood, it used a minimal amount of the metal that was more urgently needed for munitions, and brought an otherwise redundant industry to the front line of wartime production.
Who best can make these things for us? Wood, certain level of craft skill involved.
It's a single wing right through the fuselage, so it's not like a lot of aircraft where you put two individual wings on like the Spitfire. Yeah. It's a single wing right through, which gives it a lot more of its strength. Yeah.
Why not use something like the furniture industry, which is split up into many, many tiny little craft workshops, little factories around an area, therefore safe from German bombing, by and large, and able to keep production running, and with all the skills that you needed.
There are only 4 bolts which hold the fuselage and wing together, and that's one of them.
That's really incredible. I mean, that just looks like something you'd put up some shelves up with.
So, the furniture industry in Britain, most of it then based as it is today around High Wycombe, was able to make aircraft. And that's a real piece of genius.
Oh, wow, it's a bit tight there.
Versatile, reliable, and astonishingly quick, the Mosquito was adapted for use as a reconnaissance, fighter, and bomber plane.
It's really, really cool.
It traveled at over 400 miles per hour, much faster than the larger bombers, but delivered a payload comparable to the Flying Fortress, consumed less fuel, and used fewer crew. Over 7,000 Mosquitoes were built, and it ended the war with the lowest loss rate of any Allied bomber. Not bad for a design project that the experts dismissed as sheer madness.
Sometimes I think being an industrial designer gives you the ability to put forward ideas which might be ridiculed. So the idea of proposing a wooden plane that's based on one wing with things fitted to it might have seemed frankly ridiculous, and I think that's what it was deemed to be ridiculous by the Ministry of Defence at the time, but it provided firsts, design firsts. We're today very familiar with the idea of composite construction. This plane was built in exactly that way, with thin layers of plywood with balsa wood in between. But not only that, we just found out that it was the first stealth plane that was almost invisible to enemy radar because it was made of wood.
Bedspring manufacturers, toy designers, furniture makers. This was the secret army that kept Britain in the war. And just like the Nazis, the British needed a propaganda machine to explain, exhort, and motivate when the going got tough.
If this is total war and you're involving citizens at every level, there are problems that are needed to be solved that hadn't arisen before. So it's not like selling soap powder or railway journeys. It's how do you alert people to the fact that they need to behave differently in the blackout. How do you alert people to the fact that they shouldn't touch unexploded bombs? there are new issues that designers were the best placed people to solve. And so that's why you get this kind of fantastic combination of sort of visual acuity, but also this real urgency, because this isn't a commercial enterprise, this is something that matters to the life of the nation.
The messages may have been mundane, but they spoke the democratic language of the People's War and anticipated the egalitarian spirit of the welfare state. They were graphic expressions of a new British identity that was being forged by war, even though many of them were the work of foreigners.
My father, Arnold, was born in Germany, and in 1933, at the age of 14, he felt that the sort of politics of Germany was getting somewhat unstable, and he persuaded his mother that they should leave Germany and move to England, where they had some family already. Suddenly one day in 1940 he was arrested, and he was interned in Canada. He was shipped back to Britain late in 1941, and he was commissioned to design some posters for ROSPA, which was the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents. The Germans Invade poster is one of the sort of most amazing posters that I think my father had ever designed. You've got the swastika, you've got a very early Germanic typeface, and then you've got this very solid get first aid and don't help the enemy. There are a lot of meanings sort of within this poster. And this was a year or so after he'd come back from being interned in Canada, which from my memories of him talking about it was not the most pleasant place to have been. To be producing work of this nature at that point in your life, having just gone through what he'd been through, I think sort of, to me, is sort of quite remarkable.
While Britain muddled through on desperation, improvisation, and the odd dash of native or imported genius, Germany continued its quest for victory through the relentless pursuit of quality. The delirious successes of the Blitzkrieg had convinced Hitler that only the development of a master race of weapons would deliver the knockout blow he craved. An ideology embodied by a fearsome military machine unleashed on Allied forces during the Desert War in 1943.
We knew what we were going to do, we knew what the enemy was, or we thought we knew what the enemy was and where it was. And we went in 2 troops up. My troop, which was 4 troop on the left, and 3 troop, led by a friend of mine, Alan Lott, on the right. Everything was going smoothly, and we were trudging along quite happily, when there was an enormous explosion on the right side, and I saw Alan Lott's tank blown up, and he blown out of the turret. A massive burn, he was terribly burnt. Well, before I had any time to do anything at all about it, my own tank was hit. It really didn't affect me all that much. What did affect me was seeing Alan Lott and his condition, and that feeling of guilt that I'd survived and he hadn't. In fact, I think I could say that I went back to my bivvy that night and had a thoroughly good cry.
Peter Gudgeon's battalion had been unlucky. It had run up against one of the most advanced military weapons of the war, the Tiger I tank. Only one working model survives today, and it's the very same vehicle that killed Peter's friend 70 years ago. Tiger tank number 131.
This was the most impressive tank I had ever seen. I couldn't believe it was so big and so powerful. I think the most impressive thing about it, apart from its sheer size, was the enormous gun. And that was an anti-aircraft gun which they used in anti-tank role and had a fantastically accurate and heavy shell. Our instinct as regimental soldiers at that time was, we're not going to stand much of a chance against this sort of thing.
The formidable Tiger was the result of a design competition initiated by Hitler between people's car designer Ferdinand Porsche and engineering firm Henschel. On this occasion, engineering muscle prevailed over design brilliance, and Henschel's design was unveiled on Hitler's birthday in 1942.
Hitler in the 1930s looks at the tank as having tremendous symbolic power. He sees this tank as symbolizing the resurgence and the might of the new Nazi Germany.
As a 60-ton piece of propaganda, the Tiger was a huge success. When Tiger 131 was captured in the Tunisian desert in 1943, the Tommies were awestruck, celebrating its capture as if it were an enemy general. Back in England, the Army commissioned a full design report and called in an experienced tank commander, recently invalided out from the front line.
I was amazed to find my old friend the Tigers had knocked me out, coming back for examination by me. So I entered that with great enthusiasm. I wanted to know what made it work. It is beautifully engineered all the way through. The sheer detailed design they put into it. The steering gear, the transmission, the gearbox, the suspension, all the torsion bars, the way they'd machined all the armour faces before they welded them together. Beautifully engineered, very solid job, but a waste of time.
There was that tradition in German engineering and design where the most sophisticated was the best, and they just could not stop it. And the problem for the Germans was this, that they came up with these ideas for ever more powerful, ever more sophisticated tanks. But to do that, they required ever more time to think them through, ever more engineering skills, ever greater cost.
At a cost of 250,000 Reichsmark, the Tiger was more than twice the price of any German tank to date. It boasted power steering, sophisticated transmission, even a fully illustrated owner's manual. But in the grinding war of attrition that had developed since Hitler's invasion of Russia, it was a luxury item.
The design philosophy behind the Tiger is very much, let's have the best, most powerful vehicle. The downside of that design philosophy is the amount of resources the Tiger takes to make. Would you be better off building something in larger quantities that's a lot cheaper?
Born from a completely different mindset to the Tiger, this is a Russian T-34 tank. These two weapons represent a clash in design philosophies, exemplified by a simple statistic.
They only actually make 1,300 Tiger I tanks. As a comparison, the Russians make well over 60,000 T-34 tanks. They are coming out with these very crude but very effective vehicles in such quantity that whatever your quality, these T-34s are going to get you in the end.
As Joe Stalin put it, quantity has a quality all its own. And the wartime production of T-34s proved him right. Vast factories relocated beyond the reach of the advancing Germans turned out T-34s by the thousand. At staggering speed, under brutal conditions. The spirit of the Gulag, fused with the technical know-how of the car-making capital of America, Detroit.
In the late 1920s, Stalin realized that he needed to industrialize the Soviet Union. It was still essentially a pre-industrial society. They realized that the way to do that would be through the application of Fordism. So, however bizarre it may sound, Soviet economic planners came to Detroit. And they enthusiastically imported these ideas back into the Soviet Union. To the extent that the architect Albert Kahn, who designed all of Henry Ford's factories in Detroit, opened an office in the Soviet Union and designed something like 300 factories in the 1930s.
Just 3 months after Tiger 131 had blitzed Peter Gudgeon's battalion in North Africa, German ground forces were swamped by thousands of T-34s at the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle of the war. Kursk halted German advances on the Eastern Front for good. German design excellence rendered irrelevant by Soviet mass mobilization and American mass production.
Design is a process. Design is not style. The key thing that the Americans understood is just that when you set out to design any object, whether it's a gun, an aircraft, a ship, a locomotive, a uniform, a pair of shoes, you think of not just the end product, what it's going to look like, you think of how you're going to make the thing.
Like Joe Stalin, FDR believed in quantity. When America entered the war, President Roosevelt vowed to outproduce the enemy. Ford workers set about adapting their car-making skills to produce aircraft, and Detroit rebranded itself the arsenal of democracy.
Ford promises that he will set up the most extraordinary mass production facility of all, a huge aircraft production center at Willow Run, where he wants to produce B-24 Liberator bombers, and he wants them to roll off the line like a car once an hour. And by the end of the war, that's what he's achieved. A finished aircraft once every hour.
But industrial capacity on its own is not enough. Without a secure supply chain linking America to Europe, the war could not be won. And in 1942, German U-boats were sinking Allied cargo ships in the Atlantic faster than they could be replaced.
Some of the rates of losses early in World War II were shocking. It didn't look like anybody could keep up with that kind of a loss, but we did.
It took a designer of genius to come up with a solution. Shipbuilder William Francis Gibbs jettisoned centuries of tradition with a design for a cargo ship that could be mass-produced, just like a Model T or a T-34. Gibbs' design solution was not pretty. Roosevelt called it a dreadful-looking object. But its prefabricated steel parts, welded together on a Ford-style production line, meant the Liberty ship could be produced faster and cheaper than was ever thought possible. America's shipbuilders were understandably unsure. But an industrialist called Henry J. Kaiser recognized the genius of Gibbs' radical design. In Richmond, California, Kaiser built a Liberty ship production line that made him a hero of the American war effort, and transformed the lives of thousands of unlikely shipbuilders.
My husband and I, every Sunday, went for a drive. And this one Sunday, we had another couple with us. And the guys are talking about, they thought they'd get a job. They'd learn to weld, go to school, learn to weld, and get a job in a shipyard. And for some unknown reason, I piped up and said I wanted to do that too.
Had my car radio on, and all of a sudden this loud voice said, "Women, do something for your country. Go to the Richmond shipyards and be a welder." And I thought, wow, that's an important job. They're asking on the radio for us to go do that. They recommended office work, but I said, no, I want to be a welder. That's an important job, and that's what I want to do. I had no idea what it was.
I never saw a ship. We just were part of the process of parts going together. And my first job was tacking little flanges on for the cranes to pick up the pieces of steel, which is pretty nervy, you know. Here's the first day on the job and you're welding something that's really important.
You had a kerchief tied around your neck real tight. That was to prevent the hair from getting burned from the sparks. And then this was the welding hood that we put on. And then this was the rod we used to weld with. And we would put it in here. You had to rotate all the time, keep it moving.
Everyone was contributing something to the war effort. And of course a big motivator was that paycheck. And I spent some of my money on fancy underwear and and Frank Sinatra records.
The alliance of design and mass production had proved itself able to meet the life-or-death demands of a global war. But what did it have to offer a post-war world, where quantity was no longer the greatest good?
People always look at this chair and say, God, it looks uncomfortable. And I always say, you know, we'll have a seat. And then when you sit in it, it's just great.
In 1999, Time magazine named this chair, by Charles and Ray Eames, the chair of the century. The lounge chair wood was the Eames breakthrough moment, and the springboard for a range of furniture that would express the optimism of the post-war world. But this work evolved directly from their experience during wartime, and a deceptively simple question.
Well, you look at this chair, and it's actually a very simple chair. It's very elegant. It's actually not a very well-known chair, but I think it's a very important chair. And it, you know, may look kind of unassuming in a way, but it's the beginning of a journey. And it's a very simple idea. It's a two-dimensional curve. You can kind of look here and see that the curve is not going this way at all. Basically, if you had a piece of cardboard, you could make this form. And Charles in particular was really interested in this idea. Could you make it almost like a bucket? Could you make it have a three-dimensional curving in it?
The Eames began to explore the possibilities of plywood. Bending it was relatively simple. Molding it in 3 dimensions, like rubber, and on a mass scale, was something else. The demands of war provided the germ of an answer.
So, you know, sometimes people look at this thing and wonder, what is it? But actually, when you look at it this way, The combat boot would go here, and you'd be able to put it on like this, and it's modeled on Charles's leg, but with a lot of room for variation. You can see that they still haven't figured out how to make a three-dimensional curve exactly. They have to cut the wood right here to relieve the tension of the wood. They also have all these holes that also relieve the tension of the wood so it won't splinter. So they're right in the middle of understanding what it takes to mold plywood.
The Eames splint design was a compromise. But even if the curves were not perfect, more than 150,000 were made for the US Navy. Like the Sten gun or the Liberty ship, good enough today trumped perfection tomorrow.
Authenticity in design is not about a single object. It's really about a system of creating that object again and again. It's not enough to say to that medic, hey, we got one splint. He doesn't want one splint. He wants to be able to say, I need 150,000, so if we get you enough wood, we'll get that many splints, right?
From leg splints, the Eames turned to seats for gliders and aircraft parts, refining and perfecting their molding techniques. The payoff came in 1945 with the lounge chair wood. A swords into plowshares moment, and a modest but unmistakable signal that the war was finally over.
They were trying to make the seat and back of the chair one, and you look at this chair and you can obviously see they didn't do it. That the seat and back are separate, but they, after all this experimenting, they realized that the honest use of this material was to separate the seat and back, that you couldn't really do it. You couldn't make the shell out of plywood. So this chair is sort of the payoff for all the work that they did during the war. And that's, I think, why the wartime experience across the board, not just for Charles and Ray, was so fascinating, is that there was a combination of being visionary about these designs and being pragmatic at the same time.
The chair of the century, one of the first examples of high-quality, post-war consumer design, had been born of mass production, the true wonder weapon of World War II. It was a sign of things to come, a marriage that had been proposed by the Industrial Revolution and promised by the visionaries of modernism in the 20s and 30s. But it had taken a world war for design and mass production to finally consummate the relationship. The designed world would never be the same again.
What happened in the war years to design, it was reborn. And that ability to make things over and over and over again, but made them very well, really did tell us something about the ability to do things in great number. Certainly Henry Ford told us that's the way it was going to go. Le Corbusier told us that was going to happen, but we didn't quite believe it until the Second World War, and we saw its real potential. And for me, it is the thing that opens up what mass production allows in product design today.